welcome to episode 139 of Board Game Blitz, a proud member of the Dice Tower Network and a podcast about all things board games that you can listen to in less time than it takes to remove all the expansion components so you can teach someone just the base game. Board Game Blitz is sponsored by Grey Fox Games. This week, we're talking about board game expansions. First, we discuss a couple of games we've played recently, including Chope, Kopi King, and Wok and Roll. Then, we share our thoughts about expansions for board games. And now, here are your hosts,
Ambie
and Crystal. Well, Ambie, this is one of those special episodes where you and I are going to get to talk about the same games together.
Yay! Yeah, so recently we both got to play 3 different games, all from the same publisher, Ori Game, which is a publisher in Singapore.
And they're all the same designer as well. Daryl Chow designed all 3 of these games.
Yeah, and so we got review copies of Chope, Kopi King, and Wok and Roll. Well, actually, we each got a couple of them and then sent it to the other person. So it's not something we typically do. Usually if we only get one copy of a review game, we send it to one or the other and then that's just it. But this time our addresses got flipped, and so the games that were supposed to go to Ambie came to me, and the one that was supposed to go to me went to Ambie. And so we went ahead and just played those and then mailed them to the other person. And then so now we've gotten to all play all of them. So it was a happy mistake that turned into something beautiful. Yeah. So should we talk about Wok and Roll first, since we actually played that one on stream?
We did play that one on stream. In fact, Ori Game and Daryl joined us on stream for that. So I've gotten to play that one, both the tangible version and the digital version of Wok and Roll. Wok and Roll is a roll and write game where you are running a Chinese restaurant in Singapore. That is the theme of the game specifically. And you are rolling dice that have ingredients on them. There are 2 dice that only the person rolling gets to use, and then the other dice are available to all of the players. You roll the dice, and then you have a couple of rerolls you can use if you're the active player, and then once you've decided you've locked the dice in, then everybody can use the dice that they have access to mark off ingredients on their sheet to cook dishes. It all sounds very simple, and in the simple version of the game, that is kind of the gist of it. There are special abilities you can unlock, and you have a fridge that has extra ingredients that you can mark off to help you complete certain dishes. And then there is also an expert variant of the game, which kind of takes things up a notch and makes the game even more thematic, because you have to cook certain dishes to unlock other dishes. It is, quite literally as if you were learning how to cook better. I made this thing and now I can make this other thing. So, Ambie, I would love, that was the most basic of overviews, but Ambie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
So I'm not like a big fan of roll and writes, but I enjoyed it. I like the theme because I like food.
Food is great, right?
Yeah. So, I didn't actually get to play the expert version. I just played it the one time online with you all. So also I don't like digital games as much as physical games, and it was cool, the components, the box has a little wok for rolling the dice in.
Yes, so it's the really dice tray is a little plastic wok basically inside the box, which is just so good. Yeah, the component quality all around is spectacular. Yeah,
so I think that's really cool. But yeah, I did enjoy comboing together the dice, because you could combo building things and then unlocking recipe books to get bonus things, and that was pretty cool. Just trying to get the best out of your dice.
Absolutely.
And then also trying to go for a specific dish because I like that dish.
That's always great when you have a kind of more of a personal connection to the game. And the expert variant just kicks everything up a notch. It's honestly, I would say this is a roll and write game that is a really good, at least the expert variant is a really good, medium weight roll and write. Because obviously roll and writes do tend to fall on the lighter side of games in general. There's a couple that people kind of refer to as heavier roll and write games, things like Fleet, the dice game. And I would say that this is treading into that territory on the expert side of the board in a good way. There's a lot of interesting decisions that you have to make, and especially in comboing things and trying to unlock different stuff on your player board. Obviously, there is still the luck of the dice rolls, as any roll and write game will have, but it felt more strategic than a lot of other roll and write games that I've played. And I'm not hating on other roll and writes. You all know I love them. But like, there's more depth here than in your standard roll and write game. But what's great is because it does have the simple side of the board, it's still approachable. You could teach this to just about anybody and they could play the simple side of the board. But if you're with, more hardcore gamers and you really want more of a challenge, the expert side of the board will provide that for you. And Daryl told us that the expert side of the board was designed first, and then they stripped it down to create the simple side of the board to make sure that there was something that was a little bit more approachable. And I think that was a really smart decision because the game's quick to play, so you could very easily teach people the simple side, and then if they really dig it, you could say, okay, so now let's go to the expert side and have some fun, and everybody gets their own unique restaurant with a signature dish that is unique to them, and it's, the expert side gets real cool.
Yeah, the expert side sounded like a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you ever want, I know that you don't enjoy playing games digitally as much, but if you're ever interested in playing the expert side online together, we could definitely do that.
Yeah, maybe sometime.
So that was Wok and Roll.
Yep. And then there are two other games that we played. One is called Kopi King and one is Chope, Chope. And these are both involve real-time elements, which is why those are the ones that I requested. So Kopi King, Kopi, and then King. It's a real-time game about where you're like making tea and coffee drinks. So it's a card game, but all the cards are in the middle of the table, like just in a pile, and you're flipping over cards one or two at a time, one in each hand, and as fast as you can, trying to get ingredients for your drinks that you have, and then you like put them on your drinks, and then once you finish a drink, you yell out the name of the drink, and you get a new drink to make, and then you're trying to get like 5 drinks the fastest and get the most money because the drinks are worth different amounts of money, and if you mess up on the drink, then you get like negative money. So it's a very frantic, like just grabbing the ingredients. And then like if sometimes you can't find like the one ingredient that you need because it's like all under the pile or like on the other side of the table or something.
Because all the cards are face down, and when you put them back in the pile, you put them back face down too. So like you don't know where any of the ingredients are. So if there's one particular thing that you need, you're just like frantically flipping over cards one at a time trying to find it.
Yeah, but it's a really quick game, and it's cool, like, learning about the different coffee, tea drinks. But, like, this one wasn't as much of a... mechanically, we didn't enjoy this game that much. We liked Chope better, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But, yeah, so it was mostly just, like, grabbing things as fast as you can, and, like, that wasn't as interesting. Not much interaction in the game. Yeah, what did you think about Kopi King?
So this, for the record, this is not the style of game that I gravitate toward normally, and this is not something I think that I personally, as a board game player, would want to play a lot. But I think this game is unique in that it highlights a part of Singaporean culture in a way that I haven't seen before. Like the coffee and tea drinks that are in this game are ones that I'm not familiar with, but I believe if you are from Singapore or you have visited Singapore, there is a lot of stuff in here that will be very familiar to you. And the game has some neat advanced variants where if these are things that are familiar to you or your family, the advanced variants make it so when you take the order cards, you have to put all of the ingredients that you collect face down, and you don't get to look at them again. And so you have to remember both what ingredients are needed and what ingredients you've collected. So like there are ways to ramp up the difficulty. But this is definitely a family weight game all the way around. But yeah, like if you have kids or you want to play a game, with like grandma and grandma's from Singapore, like this is a cool little game for that, everybody's flipping cards over. It's frantic. It's fun. And yeah, I learned some stuff about Singaporean coffee and tea, which I didn't know. And I think that that's pretty neat. But yeah, when you're shouting out the orders, it does kind of evoke a little bit of that feeling of like a busy coffee shop, with like lots of orders coming up and you trying to make them as fast as you can, obviously, to make satisfied customers. So while it is not a game for me, I appreciate it for what it is. And I do think that there will be people who will really like this. If you like kind of memory-esque set collection, lighter weight games, this is a good one for that.
I guess also I'm not a big coffee drinker, so I wasn't as into the theme as I was for the other one. But yes, so on to Chope, which is another It's a speed / press your luck game.
Yes. So. And I have to interrupt you, Ambie, just for a tiny second, because the best thing about this game, well, not the best thing about this game, one of the most delightful things about this game is if you go to the listing on Board Game Geek, the first line of text in the description says, Singaporeans love to eat, but where there is love, there is war. And come on, that's the best marketing line for a board game I've ever heard. That's pretty good. I'm not gonna...
Yeah. Well, this game actually caused us to look up a bunch of stuff about food culture because we didn't... So apparently Chope is reserving a table at a restaurant. And in the game, each player has a card that has a tissue, a pack of tissues on one side. And then on the other side is it was the fluff thing, like a cloud or something. But so the pack of tissues, you put that on the table to reserve it. And we're do people act, that was is that what people do? And so we were looking it up, and I guess that's what you do. Or it's something common in Singapore to reserve a table. You leave the pack, a little pack of tissues on the middle of the table. So that was interesting. But yeah, anyways, in the game, it's a card game. If you've played Egyptian Ratscrew, it's a speed game that you just play with regular cards. I used to play that a lot in high school.
Man, but I had not thought about Egyptian Ratscrew in a really long time. And you just brought up some, early Crystal memories with that.
But this had reminded me somewhat of that because on your turn, you're going to be flipping over cards. So you're flipping over cards and you're trying to get these food cards. And there's a press your luck element because if you get 2 of the same food, then you bust. But otherwise, you get all the food cards that you flip over. But the table cards that you flip over, there's 3 types of cards. There's the food, table, and then the crow thing.
The minas.
Yeah. Yeah. So if a table card you flip over, then everyone else tries to put their card on top of it as fast as they can to reserve it. So that's the Egyptian Ratscrew part where they're trying to slap it kind of with their card. And so they're putting their tissue on the table. And then whoever does it first gets the table. And then with the minas, the birds, the last person to put the other side of their card on it loses a card that they've collected.
Because the bird came and swooped down and stole some of the food is basically what happened there. You didn't swat it away fast enough, I think.
Yeah, so you're trying to get, the scoring is interesting. You're trying to get sets of table, food, main dish, and side dish. So, if you have a table, then it can score 1 main dish, and the main dish can score 1 side dish. So you want to balance out. You want to have, the same number of tables and main dishes and side dishes. But then you end up getting, a bunch of main dishes and no tables or something. So you want to balance it out because you also get negative points for ones that don't pair up. So on your turn, you could do really well, but you only get a bunch of food. But then if you don't have any tables, which you can only get on other people's turns, then that's bad. So this was more interactive and fun. I really liked Egyptian Ratscrew growing up, so this reminded me of that. Yeah, so what do you think, Crystal?
I had some similar thoughts. I was very intrigued about Singaporean culture by this game in general. And I was wait, really? Is this how it works? And yeah. This, again, I feel if you or your family, are from Singapore or have visited Singapore, there's some really neat little cultural touches in this game that will resonate. And this is the type of stuff that we need in board games. How do you bring new board gamers into the hobby? Well, it's give them things to latch onto and to fall in love with. And if you're Singaporean, these types of games are going to be familiar to you, even if you don't know the mechanics of the game itself. So yes, this is definitely also a lighter card game, but I enjoyed playing it. I was doing pretty good at actually keeping my sets reasonably even, but one of the people I was playing with could not get any tables. They just weren't fast enough. And so that can definitely be a bummer. It doesn't matter how good you are at the push your luck part of the game. If you don't have that speed aspect to get a table, then obviously that's tough. But I would imagine that part of it would be easy to house rule if you were playing with, kids or somebody else who had kind of more of a disadvantage in the speed aspect of the game. But yeah, I thought it was really neat. And I like games that inspire me to learn about other cultures. Mm-hmm. So that was Chope and Kopi King and Wok and Roll, all designed by Daryl Chow and published by Ori Game. Mm-hmm. All right, Ambie, it's time to talk about expansions in board games, which I have to admit, while I've been playing board games my entire life, the idea of expansions to board games is a concept that I did not have any familiarity with until I really got into the hobby after 2007.
Yeah, I think me too. No, I'm thinking about it. I don't know if we had expansions when I was a kid.
Right, like if you had told me, that any of the board games I played as a kid had an expansion, I wouldn't have known what that even meant, I don't think. And the expansions are not a new concept. They're obviously, I think, more popular and prevalent now, and we'll probably touch on that more in a little bit. But as a concept, it was something I didn't know about until I kind of got a little bit deeper into the hobby.
Yeah. I usually don't play that many expansions, so I can't even think about, like, when I learned what expansions are, or, like, if I did know what they were when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think we had any, but I could see understanding the concept for a game like HeroQuest, which I did play as a kid, and I, like, designed my own dungeons for that, so I could see the concept of, like, having new dungeons. I don't even know if I don't think they have an expansion for HeroQuest, but if they did, I would kind of see the appeal of that, I think.
So I guess we should say, what is an expansion? Like, what?
Yes, what is an expansion? For me, I think an expansion is something that adds more content for a board game. We're talking specifically about board game expansions, but there are expansions for video games and stuff too. But yeah, so it adds more content to a base game. Usually you need a copy of the base game to play it, but there are also standalone expansions.
Yes, that's like Unmatched is a good example of that. Like you can take one of the standalone expansions to Unmatched and play with just that box, or you can combine it with components from other Unmatched content and put them together.
Yeah. Although are standalone expansions, do they always are they always able to combine with the base game, or is it sometimes...
I think so, yes. I think if they are sold if that is how they are marketed as a standalone expansion, I believe the intention is for it to both be able to be played on its own and with the base game that it is a partner to. I think, in general, if things are not combinable, publishers tend to call those, like, spiritual successors sequels or something more like that. I think when publishers use the word expansion, generally, that means you can combine it to some degree.
Yeah, that makes sense, because that's what you think of when you hear the word. Like, it's expanding the original game.
Right.
Yeah. And then on the smaller side, so standalone expansions are like the big side of expansion. That's like a big expansion. On the smaller side, there are also promos, which are often like 1 or 2 cards or something that you add to the game. Promos are like mini expansions, but they're just called promos. They have their own word for it, so...
Yeah, promos, and I would say in general, promos can affect the mechanics or gameplay, but often are a little bit more decorative. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but sometimes like promos tend to be just, here's a fun thing to throw in that doesn't really change how the game works in any meaningful way. Whereas expansions, even small ones, sometimes can change the game and the gameplay in more fundamental ways.
Yeah.
So, I know that I am more of a fan of expansions than you are, but over the course of my gaming career, I've come to realize that, for me personally, I tend to like the idea of an expansion more than the actual thing itself in a lot of instances. Like, when there's a game that I love, when I hear that there's more stuff for that thing that I love, I want to get it. And I think, we live in a consumerist society, and we don't need to get into the whys of why my brain is like that. But I often am like, ooh, yeah, I want to get this. But then sometimes, even for games that I love, purchasing expansions makes me play the games less, which seems confusing at first. But then I know for me, like, the way I've tended to game, again, this is mostly pre-pandemic, but like my weekly game group, I was often the one who was greeting and helping new people to the group or introducing people to new games. I was the one teaching. So I almost always had new players at the table, which meant that games with expansions, which often, because of the expansion content, are a little bit more complicated, I would tend to shy away from those in favor of games that were simpler or just had the base mechanisms. And so, like, there's a great example. I own Sagrada, love it. I own 2 of the expansions. I believe there are 3 total. I played with the first expansion once, I think maybe twice. Have not played with the second expansion at all, and don't own the third expansion. So, like, it's weird because I do want to try those things, but sometimes, for whatever reason, I think my brain gets overwhelmed by the choices, the options available to me, like, especially if there's different modules that you can include. And instead of making a decision, I just put that game back on the shelf.
Yeah, I think that happens with us too. The few times we do get expansions. But like we decided early on that we didn't really want expansions. We would rather like buy a new game than get an expansion. But yeah, with like Imperial Settlers, we got one of the earlier expansions and then it just got more complicated. And then also that game involves like creating your deck beforehand. So if you have an expansion, you have more cards to choose from and create the deck. Whereas if it's just the base game, the deck's already, it's just like what it comes with. You don't have to do any deck building before the game. So yeah, like too much setup. We ended up like making decks and like, okay, this is what we are use if we play it, but then we haven't played it in a while. But yeah, like what you were saying with the expansions, another reason that you might play the game less is because if you really like a game, the expansion might not necessarily add something that you like. It might like add something that you don't like as much, or like change part of the game that you loved so much.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh wait, now I don't like it as much because of the expansion. So
that, honest to God, that actually happened to me with Role Player, a game that I really loved and my game group was playing a lot. And then I got the first expansion for Role Player, the Monsters and Minions expansion. And for the record, a lot of people really like that expansion. So I'm not hating on it. I know a lot of people really enjoy it, but I personally did not enjoy the Monsters and Minions expansion. It, to me, watered down the game in a way that I didn't enjoy. Like instead of being able to do the thing I loved, it made me choose between two different things. I couldn't do both of them like well, and focusing on just one or the other was more risky because of the other options available. So it just was less fun for me to play personally. And so then they had another expansion that I think hit Kickstarter. I want to say it was called Fiends and Familiars. I was like, nope, not even going to look. I was like, I like Role Player. Yeah. I am just going to continue enjoying Role Player for what it is. So obviously we've touched on how expansions can sometimes lessen the experience of a game, but there are, at least for me, a decent number of instances where an expansion has really elevated a game, taken it to the next level, or deepened my love for it in a significant way, to the point where there are some games in my collection that I will not play without some of the expansion content that they have with them. Do you have any games like that in your collection, Ambie?
No longer in my collection, but
okay.
I have games that I used to be in my collection like that.
Okay, where the expansion like was always in there no matter what?
Yeah, so like one of them was Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, which was Toby's favorite game back in the day. But yeah, like that, I think one of the expansions for it. I'm not actually sure because I don't think I actually played it without the expansion, because Toby played it first and then like got the expansion, and there was like some expansion thing that fixed something in the base game, or like because there was like some super powerful action in the base game that gives you multiple points or something, and people would just always take that one, but then the expansion changes up the actions that you take, so he just always played with that. So I don't even know if I played with the base game.
I mean, kind of similarly, my favorite game of all time, Battlestar Galactica, when we were prepping for this episode, I realized I hadn't even included it on my list because I don't even think of Battlestar's expansions as expansions anymore. Like, to me, Battlestar Galactica is the base game and all 3 expansions all together as one single entity. And you just choose which pieces and parts you want to use. And I don't like all of the expansion content. There are modules in the expansions that I will not play with, that I don't like. But there are expansion modules in BSG that are, in my mind, essential to play with. Like, specifically the Cylon Fleet Board is the one that I think you'll hear everybody talk about. Again, this game is out of print. It's being reprinted with a different theme. It's called Unfathomable. I don't know if that's going to be any good or not, but BSG is my familiarity, and I'm curious to see what they include in Unfathomable. But yeah, like the Cylon Fleet Board fixes one of the main problems with the base game of BSG, in that, based on how the deck gets shuffled, it's possible in the base game for the humans to not have a Cylon fleet attack for a really long time. Like, just based on random chance, it's possible that the humans can just keep doing what they're doing and the Cylons never show up, like, for a really long time. And with the Cylon fleet board, the Cylons have a track similar to what the humans do in regard to how they travel. And when it reaches a certain point, the Cylons jump in no matter what shows up in that deck. And that, A, means the humans can prepare for it, and also it's going to happen, which causes more excitement and things happening in the game in general. Although, admittedly, it does make the game harder for humans, but, like, that's kind of the point. Like, so.
Yeah. I was thinking back on the other expansions that I used to have. Like, I had Arkham Horror, I had Dunwich Horror, the expansion for that, and we would play that and like it. And then the other game that I had a bunch of expansions for was Android Netrunner, which is a living card game, which, like, the point of that is to get all of the expansions. Like all the expansions, you're getting the extra card sets and stuff for that to make your decks. So yeah, that's like a type of game that is built on getting the expansions, like those card games and living card games specifically. But yeah, that's a coincidence that like all of those were Fantasy Flight games.
That is interesting that they are. Yeah, those are all Fantasy Flight. Well, if we want to talk about stuff that's not Fantasy Flight, I've got some options for us, because I think the games that I have where I believe the expansions are either essential or really great to have are games that fall kind of into two categories. Either games, like expansions that kind of tweak a thing about the base game that wasn't quite perfect to begin with, and now it's better. Another example of that would be Champions of Midgard, the expansions for that game, which, shout out to our sponsor, Grey Fox. They're amazing, and Champions of Midgard is a game I've loved since way before they sponsored our show, even though they've been sponsoring us for a very long time now. But yeah, Champions of Midgard, in the base game, when your dice, which are your, like, warriors, when they died, you didn't get anything for them. So if you sent a whole bunch of them into battle and they all died, that was kind of a bummer. And in one of the expansions, you get tokens for those dice when they die that you can then spend on other things. So it makes, like, a bad defeat in battle feel a little less harsh, and it gives you the ability to kind of, like, recoup and bring yourself back up a little bit. And so I like that quite a bit. And then the other category of games, I would say games that just add more content, and that tends to fall in the realm of games that have some kind of variable set up. So either different player powers or different end game, like, enemies. So, like, something like Runebound, I have all of the expansions for Runebound because each one is a different scenario with a different enemy at the end of the game that you're fighting toward, and it adds new cards into some of the smaller decks. Or Fog of Love has expansions that just add different stories to the game. And so once you've played through all of the stories of the base game, you can play them again. They're completely replayable, but it's nice to have some new stuff. And so those tend to be the types of expansions that I gravitate toward, or the ones that, like, if this is a game that I love and I want to play a lot, and this expansion will allow me to play it again, kind of similar mechanically, but with some new content, I like that generally.
Yeah, I think I just thought of the types of expansions that I do like are ones that are for games that end. Like, I don't know. So, like, games that are single play stories. Like, so, like, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a mystery game, and once you solve a case, that's it. But then they have these standalone expansions that have extra cases. So that I like that. Or like T.I.M.E Stories, which that ended up the expansions not being as great, but like it started out where like I wanted to get.
It was great. It was great at one point. We still T.I.M.E Stories. I don't know how you fell so far, but boy, oh boy,
I still haven't played the last couple of expansions, but I kind of want to. But anyway, but and also one of my favorite games, Tragedy Looper. It has 10 scenarios in the base game because it's a deduction game, and then like each scenario, once you deduce it, then you kind of know what it is. So the expansions add more scenarios and more characters and stuff. So like I haven't played all of the expansions yet, but I've started on them. So
the types of expansions that you tend to like are kind of the ones that I would say we would liken to like video game expansions. That like you've finished the game and now you can dive back into the game and still play some of the same stuff you already did, but also some new stuff that like is the same but different.
like a different story.
Yeah, like, or adding on to the story at the end or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, but it's mostly for games that, like, I wouldn't be able to play again otherwise.
Okay.
I think, so. Because for games that I can play again, I like just playing them again.
Yeah. So a couple other games that I wrote down in my notes that have expansions that I really love. Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is a really fun push your luck game. The Herb Witches expansion for that is fairly small as expansions go and only adds like a couple new things. And so it's pretty easy to integrate with the base game, but it does add some new mechanisms, but it's small. And so I think I enjoyed that one because it was easy to learn and incorporate, and it's still basically just as easy to teach alongside the base game. So that's nice, especially because I don't tend to play the same games over and over and over and over again. I'm teaching new players a lot. Another one, Pursuit of Happiness, which I actually taught to Ambie a few years ago at BlitzCon. Pursuit of Happiness is basically if the game of life was an actual gamery board game where you're literally like getting a job, like dating, potentially getting married, and doing activities and hobbies and other things. But it's really interesting because it's a worker placement game and you have to allocate your time to all of these things. And the expansions are neat. Like one of them adds a community board where now instead of just like helping out your own interests, you're actually doing stuff in the community with potentially other people. And so it takes the same concept and expands on it. Like if you were living a real life, these are things that you would be doing.
Huh, that's cool.
I have new expansion content that I haven't played with yet that I got during the pandemic. And then once I get the big box, I think that comes with another expansion. And for that game, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm down. I want all of it just because I really like that game. But I'm not like that with everything. So that one's kind of rare for me. The only other thing that I wanted to mention is games that, yeah, like I mentioned briefly, that have different player powers. So games with asymmetrical player abilities, I tend to enjoy expansions to those because they can just give you more options. It can also make the learning curve a little bit more difficult if you have to learn new things. But like for Star Trek Ascendancy, the base game only came with humans, Klingons, and Romulans, I think. I can't remember which ones were in the base game now. And they've added on, I think Romulans got added. They added Ferengi, they've added the Vulcan High Council, they've added, and all of these different factions work differently in the game. And so it's neat to have those different options, especially if your gameplay style meshes with one and not another.
I was just looking at my list of expansions that I still own. And I just remembered that like the one expansion that I actually do play a lot and like is a promo, and that was the Dungeon Petz bonus pets, which is just 2 pets that you add to the game Dungeon Petz. So Dungeon Petz I've talked about a lot, but you're a pet store owner for like these monsters and trying to take care of them and stuff and clean up their poop. But my favorite pet from the game is one of these bonus pets that came as a promo expansion, and it's Skelly, and he's so cute. He's a deceased imp that drank too much potion. So
okay,
he's
that's
like a little
adorable.
Skeleton, and he comes with a potion, and it's really cute. But yeah, I just have the promo pets in the base game, and kind of I guess that's in the category of like forgot that it's an expansion.
Yep. I think the thing that's tough for me about expansion specifically, kind of to wrap this all up, is like we obviously, as a podcast, like to suggest things to people in hopes that they might be interested in them. And I often say, if you have the ability to play a board game before you buy it, sometimes that can be really great because then you can learn whether it really fits your gaming style or whatever else. But when it comes to expansions, that's hard to do. Like you can't as easily try out an expansion. And so if you were to ask me like, oh, hey, I really love X game and it has an expansion, should I get that expansion? Unless I have played both the base game and the expansion and know them well, it's really difficult for me to make a recommendation there because expansions tend to run the gamut. Sometimes I really like them and sometimes I really don't. Whereas with games, I can kind of be like, oh, if you like X, Y, and Z, you'll like this. But there are some clear-cut answers for me. Like, if you like the game's stockpile, buy the Continuing Corruption expansion and immediately throw it in. Just do it, like, immediately, because it just makes the game better. The forecast dice especially, just do it. But, like, I don't have that answer for a lot of things. So, it's harder. Like, I don't want to, be singing the praises of an expansion if I don't know that it's gonna resonate with as many people or whatever. It's just, I think it's harder to recommend expansions than games. At least for me personally.
Yeah, because then also it's like what you said with role player some people will like it and some people don't, because it depends on what you liked about the base game, probably.
Right, because that's what's interesting is, like, it's different for whatever reason with the expansion and the game itself. Like, it's easier for me to either recommend or not recommend Role Player to somebody based on what I know about what games they like and what type of gamer they are. But the expansion, I don't have that same touch point for whatever reason. Like, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's harder for my brain to wrap around that, I think.
And that's it for this week's Board Game Blitz. Visit our website, boardgameblitz.com, for video and blog content, as well as to get links to all our social media pages. This episode was sponsored by Grey Fox Games. Make sure you're following Grey Fox Games on social media to get updates about the upcoming Kickstarter for Last Light, a 4X game that plays quickly and was designed by friend of the show, Roy Kennedy. Want to get some Grey Fox games at a discount? They are offering Blitzketeers 20% off non-exclusive items on their website. Just use the code BGBLITZ21 at checkout. Grey Fox Games. Quality games cleverly crafted. Join the Blitzketeer community on Discord by following the link in the show notes. You can support the show by leaving us a rating and review on your podcast provider. And if you want behind-the-scenes access and an invite to our private Slack channel, visit patreon.com/boardgameblitz. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Morrow. Technical support provided by Toby Mao. Board Game Blitz is part of the Dice Tower Network. Until next time, playing hard to get my fill. Everybody wants a thrill. Expanding all my games just one more time.